The twin suns hung low over the horizon, casting the sky in swaths of gold and crimson. Marcus Hayes knelt in the soft, loamy soil of his garden, coaxing the stubborn tendrils of a Terran vine into neat rows. The colony's air, thick with the scent of alien blossoms, hummed with distant insectoid life. It was quiet here, a serenity Marcus had earned after decades of mediating disputes that would have broken lesser men. He straightened with a groan, brushing dirt from his hands onto his worn trousers. The aches were familiar companions now, steady reminders of his age. He wiped his brow, gaze trailing toward the distant hills where the shadows lengthened like creeping fingers. Peace was rare in the galaxy, and Marcus guarded his fiercely. That was why the sound of approaching footsteps sent a jolt through him. The rhythm was too deliberate for a colonist. He reached for the spade resting against the fence, more instinct than logic. By the time three figures emerged from the tree line, the spade hung forgotten at his side. They were Vantari. Their scales gleamed iridescent under the dying light, a patchwork of emerald and copper hues. The lead figure, tall and imposing, wore ceremonial armor etched with intricate patterns that shimmered faintly. Behind him, two others flanked his sides like sentinels, their expressions unreadable but their posture coiled with tension. "Marcus Hayes," the leader said, his voice deep with a resonance that felt like distant thunder. "We seek your guidance." Marcus exhaled slowly, his shoulders stiffening. "I'm retired." The Vantari inclined his head, acknowledging the deflection, but undeterred. "Your retirement is known to us. It does not change what we ask." "Who are you?" Marcus asked, stepping closer, eyes narrowing. "And why do you think I can help you?" "I am Kaldra," the leader replied, "elder of the Lythran lineage." He gestured toward the smaller figure stepping forward, a young Vantari, no more than a fledgling by their species standards. "This is Toril. They carry the weight of their family's future, and they need a teacher." Toril's luminous eyes flicked to Marcus, then away, as if afraid to hold his gaze for too long. Their youth was evident in the way they stood, nervous, hesitant, but also curious. Something about them reminded Marcus of a cornered animal, equal parts fear and defiance. Marcus crossed his arms. "I'm not a teacher. I'm a gardener now. Whatever politics you're tangled up in, I'm not interested." Kaldra stepped closer, his presence magnetic and unyielding. "Do you know what it means to refuse me, human? Our people are at the brink of collapse. Generations of blood feuds have left us fractured, clinging to honor that has turned into poison. Toril is our chance to break the cycle, but they cannot do it alone. We were told you understand such conflicts better than most." Marcus scoffed. "Conflicts, sure. I've mediated trade disputes, territorial arguments, and the occasional cultural misunderstanding. But fixing your species' dysfunction? That's above my pay grade." Kaldra's eyes gleamed like molten gold. "Then what price would you name to atone for your own failures?" The words hit like a slap, and Marcus's jaw tightened. His failures. The ghosts of the past stirred, unwelcome as ever. He glanced at Toril, who watched him intently now, as if searching for something beneath his stoic exterior. "That's a cheap shot," Marcus said at last. "It is the truth," Kaldra countered, "and it is why you must accept." Marcus turned away, staring at the horizon where the suns bled into the earth. He had spent years running from the guilt, burying it under layers of routine and quiet isolation. The idea of confronting it now, for the sake of strangers, felt like ripping open an old wound. And yet, there was something in Toril's eyes that struck a chord, a desperate yearning he recognized all too well. He sighed, his voice heavy with resignation. "Tell me what you want." Kaldra's shoulders relaxed slightly, though his tone remained grave. "Toril is caught between the traditions of vengeance that bind our people and the potential to lead us into unity. We want you to show them the human way. Teach them what you know of forgiveness, of family bonds. Show them an alternative." Marcus chuckled bitterly. "Forgiveness? You're asking the wrong man for that lesson." "Perhaps," Kaldra said, "but you are the one we have." Toril stepped forward suddenly, their voice trembling but firm. "I don't want to be what they expect me to be. I've seen what revenge does. I don't want to lose myself to it. Please, Marcus Hayes." The vulnerability in their plea clawed at Marcus's defenses. He glanced at Caldra, then back at Toril. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, heavier than any burden he'd carried in years. "Fine," he muttered, "but on one condition. I do this my way. No interference." Caldra nodded solemnly. "Agreed. And one more thing," Marcus added, jabbing a finger at Caldra. "If this goes sideways, if this kid ends up worse off, it's on you." "It will not," Caldra said, the conviction in his voice like stone. Marcus shook his head, already regretting the decision. "All right then. Toril, was it? I hope you're ready, kid, because I don't sugarcoat anything." Toril's lips parted in what might have been the beginnings of a smile. "I'll try." Marcus grabbed his spade and slung it over his shoulder. "Good. First lesson starts tomorrow. Let's see if you're as teachable as you look." As the Vantari departed, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts, he stared after them, a pit forming in his stomach. He hadn't lied. He wasn't the right man for this job. But maybe, just maybe, he could be the man Toril needed. The twin suns dipped below the horizon, plunging the garden into shadow. Marcus stood there long after they'd gone, the scent of soil and alien blossoms swirling around him. The past had come knocking, and this time, it refused to be ignored. The morning sun broke across the horizon, its twin rays bathing the colony in hues of amber and lilac. Marcus stood on the porch of his modest home, sipping coffee from a battered metal mug, the earthy aroma curling into the crisp air. Toril sat cross-legged on the ground nearby, their long tail flicking anxiously over the dirt. The fledgling Vantari's scales shimmered faintly in the light, their eyes trained on Marcus with an expectant intensity. "All right, first lesson," Marcus said, lowering the mug. His voice carried the gravel of someone who'd spent years saying hard things to harder people. "Forgiveness isn't weakness." Toril tilted their head, their reptilian features betraying a flicker of skepticism. "That sounds contradictory. In Vantari history, those who forgave their enemies were seen as cowards. It's why our lineages exist. To settle the scores, they didn't." Marcus sighed, setting his mug down on the wooden railing. "Let me put it another way. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about cutting yourself free from the weight of carrying their mistake around your neck." Toril blinked, considering the metaphor, but their tale stilled. "That's a strange way of seeing it." "Strange or not, it's the truth. Hatred and revenge, they're chains, kid. They keep you tethered to the people who wronged you long after they're gone. Forgiveness breaks those chains." Marcus stepped down from the porch and grabbed a small stone from the garden bed. He pressed it into Toril's hand, his gaze unwavering. "Hold this." Toril obeyed, clutching the stone in their clawed hand. "And now? Now squeeze it as hard as you can." Toril tightened their grip, their hand trembling as their claws pressed into the rock. Marcus watched silently, letting the seconds drag until Toril's fingers quivered with effort. "It hurts," Toril admitted. "Good. Now let go." When Toril released the stone, their shoulders dropped, the relief visible even on their alien form. They stared at Marcus, understanding flickering behind their eyes. "That's forgiveness," Marcus said, folding his arms. "You're the one who feels better for letting go, not them." Toril turned the stone over in their hand, silent for a long moment. "But what if they deserve to be punished?" "Oh, they probably do," Marcus said, his tone sharp. "Doesn't mean you have to be the one to carry it. Revenge isn't justice, Toril. It's a debt that never gets paid." Toril frowned, their tail twitching again. "If I forgive someone, does that mean I stop honoring my family?" "Not at all," Marcus said, kneeling to meet their gaze. "It means you're honoring something bigger than vengeance. You're honoring the future." Toril's eyes widened, but before they could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the tree line. Marcus stiffened, his hand instinctively brushing the multi-tool on his belt. A moment later, two figures emerged from the shadows. They were Vantari, taller and bulkier than Toril. The first, Karen, had scales dark as obsidian and eyes like molten fire. The second, Veyron, stood behind with a stoic demeanor, their copper-hued armor glinting ominously. Both exuded an air of barely restrained hostility. "Toril," Karen said, their voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "What are you doing?" Toril rose slowly, their body language guarded. "Learning." "From this human?" Karen spat the word like it was poison. "You're wasting your time. This weakling cannot teach you what it means to protect our lineage." Marcus straightened, his eyes narrowing. "And you must be the family I've been hearing so much about." Karen ignored him, stalking closer to Toril. "Come home, little one. You've been gone long enough. The world will see your absence as cowardice, and I won't allow our name to be tarnished." Toril stepped back. "I'm not a coward, and Marcus isn't weak. He's showing me something different." "Different," Karen sneered. "Different will get you killed." "Different might stop you from killing each other," Marcus interjected, his tone calm but firm. Maybe that's what Toril's trying to figure out. Karen turned on him, their scales catching the sunlight like shards of obsidian glass. "You think your human wisdom can undo centuries of tradition? You don't understand our people, human. Honor is survival. Without it, we are nothing." "Sounds like honor's been dragging you into the dirt for generations," Marcus said. "Maybe it's time for a new tradition." Karen snarled, their tail lashing dangerously. "Be careful, human. Your tongue might cost you more than you can afford." Veyron, who had been silent until now, placed a steadying hand on Karen's shoulder. "Enough," they said, their voice low and measured. "We didn't come here to fight." Karen jerked away from the touch, glaring at Toril. "You have until tomorrow to come to your senses, little one. After that, don't expect us to protect you from the consequences of this foolishness." With that, Karen turned sharply and disappeared into the trees, Veyron following a step behind. Toril stood frozen, their chest rising and falling rapidly. "Well," Marcus said, his voice dry. "They seem fun at parties." Toril's head snapped toward him, eyes wide with worry. "Karen doesn't make empty threats. If I stay, they'll see me as an enemy." "And if you go?" Marcus asked, his gaze steady. Toril looked away, their tail curling tightly around their feet. "I'll lose myself." Marcus nodded, the tension between them palpable. "Then I guess we'd better make this lesson stick." Later that evening, as the stars blanketed the sky, Marcus found Toril perched on a large rock near the edge of the colony. They stared out at the endless expanse of wilderness, their form illuminated by the soft glow of the moons. "You all right, kid?" Marcus asked, approaching slowly. Toril didn't turn. "Karen wasn't always like this. When I was younger, they used to protect me, taught me to hunt, to fight. But now, it's like everything is about vengeance, about proving something." "People change," Marcus said, sitting on a nearby boulder. "Sometimes for the worse, sometimes for the better." Toril looked at him, their expression heavy with doubt. "Do you really think Karen can change?" "I think anyone can change," Marcus said. "But they have to want to. Your job isn't to change Karen, it's to figure out what you want and to fight for it." Toril was silent for a long moment, the weight of their choices pressing down on them. "I want to believe you," they said finally. "But believing is hard when the whole world tells you you're wrong." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's the first step, kid. Believing anyway." Toril's gaze lingered on him, something unspoken passing between them. For the first time, the walls they had built around themselves seemed to falter. And for the first time, Marcus began to believe he might be able to help them. The next morning arrived cloaked in a thick mist, the twin suns struggling to pierce through the haze. Marcus stood at the edge of his small garden, surveying the horizon. He could feel the storm brewing, not in the weather, but in the air, thick with the tension of unresolved conflict. Behind him, Toril paced, their tail flicking nervously, the soft scrape of claws on dirt grating against Marcus's patience. "Kid, wear a groove in the ground if you want," Marcus said, his voice sharper than he intended. "But pacing isn't going to fix anything." Toril stopped, their glowing eyes narrowing. "You're awfully calm for someone who's probably about to be attacked." "That's because I've learned this one simple trick. Don't panic until the swords are already swinging." Marcus gave them a pointed look. "You might want to try it." Toril huffed, turning away, their shoulders hunched. "Easy for you to say. It's not your family, not your name." Marcus strode over, his boots crunching against the ground. "No, it's not my family," he said, his tone low but firm. "But it is my problem now. You came to me for help, remember? So maybe trust me a little before you start panicking about things that haven't even happened yet." Toril's tail stilled, their shoulders slumping slightly. "I'm not panicking," they muttered, though their voice lacked conviction. Before Marcus could press further, the sound of distant voices reached them. Low, guttural tones carried on the damp air, growing louder with each passing second. Marcus tensed, his hand instinctively brushing his multi-tool. Toril turned sharply, their eyes wide. "They're here," they whispered. "Stay behind me," Marcus said, stepping forward. Out of the mist emerged Kaoran and Veyron, flanked by several more Vantari warriors. Their ceremonial armor gleamed in the muted light, the intricate etchings on their chest plates catching what little sun managed to break through. Kaoran's fiery eyes locked onto Marcus, a predatory grin spreading across their face. "Well, human," Kaoran said, their voice dripping with derision, "still pretending you have something to teach my sibling?" Marcus folded his arms, his expression unflinching. "Pretending? Nah, I've got plenty to teach. Whether you're smart enough to listen is a different story." Karen's grin twisted into a snarl, but Veyron stepped forward, placing a hand on their sibling's arm. "We didn't come here for words," Veyron said, their voice calm but laden with menace. "We came for Toril." Marcus glanced at Toril, who stood frozen behind him. "You hear that, kid? Sounds like they think they've got a say in your choices." Corin's tail lashed, their patience clearly fraying. "Toril is bound by our lineage, by honor. They will return with us." Toril stepped forward, their voice trembling but resolute. "No." The single word hung in the air, a challenge sharp enough to cut. Kaoran's eyes narrowed, their claws flexing at their sides. "No?" they repeated, as though the word itself was an affront. "You think this human has made you strong enough to defy us?" "I think—" Toril hesitated, then straightened, their voice gaining strength. "I think he's made me strong enough to choose." Kaoran let out a low, rumbling laugh, a sound that sent chills crawling up Marcus's spine. "And what will you choose, little sibling? To betray your family? To shame our name?" "I'm not betraying anyone," Toril said, their voice firm now. "I'm trying to save us. From ourselves." Kaoran's laugh cut off abruptly, their expression hardening into something cold and lethal. "Enough of this," they snapped. "If words will not sway you, perhaps action will." In a blur of motion, Kaoran drew a curved blade from their belt, the metal glinting ominously. Toril froze, their scales flaring slightly in fear. Marcus stepped forward instinctively, his voice cutting through the tension. "Put it down, Kaoran," he said, his tone sharp as steel. "This isn't the way." "And what do you know of our ways, human?" Kaoran snarled, leveling the blade at Marcus. "This is how we settle things. It is our tradition." "Yeah? Maybe your tradition is garbage," Marcus shot back. "If this is what you call family, it's no wonder you're all tearing each other apart." Kaoran lunged. The blade arced through the air, aiming directly for Marcus's chest. But Marcus had spent decades in the field, and his reflexes hadn't dulled as much as he liked to pretend. He sidestepped just in time, grabbing Kaoran's wrist and twisting it sharply. The blade clattered to the ground. "Listen to me," Marcus said, his grip like iron as he stared Kaoran down. "You think this is strength? Beating down your sibling because they dared to think differently? That's not strength, that's fear, and it's going to destroy you if you don't let it go." Kaoran wrenched their arm free, snarling, but something in their eyes faltered. For the first time, doubt crept into their expression. Marcus took a step back, keeping his stance defensive but non-threatening. Toril stepped forward, their voice steady. "Kaoran, please." I don't want to fight you. I don't want to fight anyone. But if you make me choose between tradition and what's right, I'll choose what's right." Cowran stared at Toril, their chest rising and falling rapidly. For a moment it seemed as though they might back down, but then Veyron stepped forward, their voice calm and calculating. "This is pointless," Veyron said, addressing Cowran. "Toril has made their choice. Let them face the consequences." Cowran's tail lashed again, but they didn't argue. Instead, they bent down, picked up their blade, and sheathed it with a sharp, final motion. "Fine," they said, their voice low and venomous. "But don't think this is over, little sibling. You've made your choice. Now live with it." With that, they turned and stalked off into the mist, their entourage following silently. Veyron cast one last glance at Marcus and Toril before disappearing into the fog. The silence that followed was deafening. Toril exhaled shakily, their body trembling from the adrenaline. Marcus put a steadying hand on their shoulder. "You did good, kid," he said, his voice soft. Toril looked up at him, their eyes filled with both fear and determination. "Do you really think this can work? That they can change?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know, but I think you can show them how." Toril's gaze lingered on him, and for the first time a flicker of hope appeared in their expression. But that hope was fragile, like a flame in a storm. And Marcus knew the storm was far from over. The mist lingered into the afternoon, curling low around the colony like a restless phantom. Marcus stood at the window of his modest home, staring into the haze. Toril sat cross-legged on the floor, their gaze fixed on the fire crackling in the hearth. The tension between them was palpable, heavy with the weight of Cowran's parting words. "Live with it," Marcus muttered, echoing Cowran's threat. "That wasn't a promise, kid. That was a warning." Toril's tail flicked nervously. "I know." Their voice was barely above a whisper. "Cowran won't let this go. They'll come back, and next time it won't just be them." Marcus turned from the window, his expression grim. "Then we'd better make sure next time doesn't happen." Toril looked up, their luminous eyes searching his face. "How? They're not going to listen to me. They don't respect me." Marcus grabbed a chair and sat across from them, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Respect isn't handed out, Toril. It's earned. And it's not earned by doing what they want. It's earned by standing your ground, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Toril shook their head, their voice trembling. "What if I'm not strong enough?" Marcus's gaze softened. "You're already stronger than you think. You stood up to Cowran back there, didn't you?" "I had you," Toril said, their tone bitter. "I can't always rely on you to save me." "You're right," Marcus said simply. "You can't, which is why we're going to make sure you're ready for whatever comes next." Toril frowned, uncertainty flickering across their face. "How?" "By showing them what strength really looks like," Marcus said, standing. "Come on, we've got work to do." Hours later, in a clearing near the edge of the colony, the mist had lifted, replaced by the sharp, cool light of late afternoon. Marcus stood in the center of the clearing, a long stick in his hands, his posture loose but purposeful. Toril faced him, their own makeshift staff held awkwardly in their claws. "This is ridiculous," Toril muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "No. What's ridiculous is thinking you can talk your way out of every situation without being ready for the ones that don't listen," Marcus said. He twirled his stick, the movement fluid and controlled. "Now focus." "Oh." Toril sighed but adjusted their grip, mimicking his stance. "I thought you were supposed to be teaching me about forgiveness." "Forgiveness doesn't mean letting yourself get trampled," Marcus said, lunging forward in a swift motion. His staff struck Toril's with a resounding crack, forcing them back a step. "It means knowing when to fight and when not to." Toril grunted, recovering quickly and swinging their staff in a wide arc. Marcus sidestepped effortlessly, his movements precise and deliberate. "Too slow," he said. "Try again." For the next hour, the clearing echoed with the sounds of wood clashing against wood and the steady cadence of Marcus's instructions. Toril's frustration grew with each misstep, their tail lashing in irritation. "I can't do this," they shouted, dropping the staff. "I'm not a warrior like Cowran. I'll never be like them." "Good," Marcus barked, his tone sharp. "The last thing this galaxy needs is another Kyoran." Toril glared at him, their chest heaving. "Then what do you want from me?" "I want you to be you," Marcus said, his voice softening. He stepped closer, his stick lowering to the ground. "You're not Kyoran, and you're not me. You're Toril, and that's enough." Toril's eyes shimmered with emotion, but they didn't look away. Slowly they bent to pick up their staff. "All right," they said quietly. "I'll try again." That evening, back at the house. The fire crackled warmly, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Toril sat at the table, nursing a mug of tea Marcus had brewed from local herbs. The tension from earlier had eased, replaced by a tentative calm. "You said strength is about standing your ground," Toril said, breaking the silence. "But how do you know when to stop fighting? When to forgive?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, the firelight reflecting off his weathered face. "It's not easy," he admitted. "Sometimes it feels like forgiving means giving up, but it's not. It's about deciding what matters more, winning the fight or moving forward." Toril considered this, their gaze distant. "Kyoran would never forgive anyone. They think it makes them weak." "Kyoran's wrong," Marcus said firmly. "Real strength isn't about holding on to anger. It's about letting go of it." Before Toril could respond, a loud knock echoed through the house, shattering the quiet. Marcus shot to his feet, his instincts immediately on edge. "Stay here," he said, grabbing the multi-tool from his belt. He moved to the door, opening it cautiously. On the porch stood Kaldra, the elder who had first brought Toril to him. Their expression was grave, their golden eyes shimmering with urgency. "We don't have much time," Kaldra said, their voice low. "The factions are gathering. They've heard about Toril's defiance." Marcus frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means they're using Toril's actions as an excuse to escalate the conflict," Kaldra said. "If we don't act now, it will be war." Behind Marcus, Toril appeared in the doorway, their expression pale. "War? Because of me?" "Because of all of us," Kaldra said. "But you are the spark, Toril, and perhaps the solution." Marcus's jaw tightened. "What do you need us to do?" Kaldra hesitated, their gaze flicking to Toril. "The factions are meeting at the convergence site. They're demanding a resolution. You must come, Toril. You must show them there is another way." Toril looked to Marcus, their fear plain. "I can't do this alone." "You're not alone," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We'll go together." Later that night, at the convergence site, the site was a massive stone amphitheater carved into the side of a cliff, illuminated by glowing orbs suspended in the air. Hundreds of Vantari filled the space, their voices rising in an angry cacophony. The air buzzed with tension, every word a spark threatening to ignite a fire. Marcus and Toril stood at the edge of the gathering, flanked by Kaldra. All eyes turned to them as they stepped forward, the crowd falling into a tense silence. Kyoran was there, their expression a mask of fury. "You dare to come here?" they snarled. "After everything?" Toril stepped forward, their voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "I came because this has to stop. We're destroying ourselves, Kyoran. And for what? To prove we're strong? To avenge slights that should have been forgotten generations ago?" Kyoran sneered. "You think your human friend's words make you wise? You're a child playing at peace." "Maybe I am," Toril said, their voice gaining strength. "But even a child can see what you refuse to. We can't survive like this, and we don't have to." The crowd murmured, the tension shifting. Kaldra stepped forward, addressing the gathering. "Toril speaks the truth. If we cannot forgive, we will perish." Kyoran growled, stepping closer to Toril. "And if we cannot trust? If forgiveness is met with betrayal?" Marcus intervened, his voice cutting through the noise. "That's the risk. But it's one worth taking, because the alternative is endless war, and you know where that ends." Kyoran stared at him, their fury wavering. For the first time, doubt flickered in their eyes. Toril held their ground, their voice clear and strong. I'm choosing forgiveness. I'm choosing the future, and I hope you'll stand with me." The amphitheater fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on all of them. The storm was far from over, but for the first time, there was a chance for the winds to change. The amphitheater remained steeped in a tense, unnatural silence, every Vantari eye fixed on Toril. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Marcus stood just behind them, watching the young alien hold their ground against centuries of cultural inertia embodied in Kaurin's simmering fury. Kaurin's claws flexed as their tail lashed violently. "You stand here," they hissed, their voice sharp and venomous, "preaching forgiveness to those who have bled for our survival. You spit on our sacrifices, Toril, on our honor." Toril didn't flinch. Their voice, though tremulous, rang clear through the amphitheater. "I honor those sacrifices, Kaurin, but I won't sacrifice our future for them. How many more have to die for this cycle to end?" Kaurin's jaw tightened, the crowd murmuring around them. Veyron stepped forward, their calmer demeanor attempting to stem the rising tension. "Toril," they began, their voice steady and even, "if forgiveness is so powerful, show us. Forgive Kaurin for threatening you. Forgive them for raising a blade against you. Show us this strength you speak of." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Marcus stiffened, his instincts screaming at him to intervene, but Toril raised a clawed hand, a subtle gesture of assurance. "I do forgive you, Kaurin," Toril said, their luminous eyes locking onto their siblings. "Not because you deserve it, because I deserve to move forward, because I want us to move forward. Together." For a heartbeat, the amphitheater held its collective breath. Then Kaurin surged forward, grabbing Toril by the shoulders. Marcus's body coiled, ready to act, but Kaurin stopped short, their claws trembling. Their face was a storm of emotions, anger, confusion, and something that looked startlingly like shame. You're a fool, little sibling," Kaurin whispered, their voice breaking. "But perhaps I am too." The words struck like a lightning bolt. The amphitheater erupted in murmurs, the ripple of doubt spreading through the gathered factions. Marcus saw the tide shift in their faces, the cracks in the rigid veneer of their traditions. He felt something stir in his chest, a faint hope he hadn't dared to believe in until now. Later that night, in the flickering light of the amphitheater's torches, Marcus sat on the edge of a crumbling stone seat, watching the crowd slowly disperse. The Vantari were murmuring amongst themselves, their discussions laced with uncertainty and possibility. Toril sat beside him, their expression weary but resolute. "You did it, kid," Marcus said, his voice low. "You made them think." Toril shook their head. "Thinking isn't enough. They'll go back to their lineages, back to their factions. What if nothing changes?" Marcus smirked faintly. "Change doesn't happen overnight. It's like planting a seed. You don't see the growth right away, but it's there, under the surface. And if you nurture it, well, it can grow into something pretty damn strong." Toril's eyes softened. "Do you really believe that, after everything?" Marcus hesitated, his gaze distant. "I didn't used to. But seeing you tonight, yeah, I do." Before Toril could respond, Keldra approached, their regal form casting a long shadow in the firelight. The elder's expression was unreadable, their golden eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "You've given them something they haven't had in generations," Keldra said, their voice low. "Hope." Toril looked up at Keldra, their weariness slipping into resolve. "Hope isn't enough. They need to see that it works, that it's not just words." Keldra nodded solemnly. "And they will. You've set something in motion tonight that cannot be undone, but it will take time." Marcus stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Time, effort, and a hell of a lot of patience. Speaking of which, I think the kids earned a break. Let them rest before we talk about saving the galaxy again." Keldra smiled faintly, a rare crack in their stoic facade. "Of course. But Marcus," their gaze turned sharp, "you too have planted seeds tonight. Do not let them wither." Marcus stiffened slightly, the words settling uncomfortably in his chest. He nodded curtly. unsure of what else to say. The following morning, back at Marcus's home, the twin suns rose higher in the sky, burning off the last of the mist. Marcus sat on his porch, a steaming mug of coffee cradled in his hands. Toril joined him, their posture more relaxed than Marcus had seen since their arrival. "What happens now?" Toril asked, their voice quiet. Marcus took a sip of his coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. "Now you keep doing what you're doing. You keep speaking up, keep showing them there's another way." Toril looked at him, their eyes filled with uncertainty. "And you?" Marcus sighed, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "I've got some calls to make, some fences to mend." Toril tilted their head, curiosity flickering in their expression. "Your family." "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice low. "I've been telling you to stand up for what you believe in, to fix what's broken. Guess it's about time I took my own advice." Toril smiled faintly, a rare moment of levity breaking through the weight of their shared journey. "I think they'll listen?" Marcus chuckled. "Guess we're both going to find out." 1 week later, on a distant communication relay, Marcus stood in front of a terminal, his hands hovering over the controls. The message he'd composed sat on the screen, stark and unflinching in its simplicity. "To my brother Simon, it's been too long. I've been a stubborn old fool and I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Can we talk?" He stared at the words for what felt like an eternity before finally pressing the button to send the message. The screen blinked, and the message was gone. For the first time in years, Marcus felt something lift from his chest. A chain, broken. Months later, in the Vantari capital, the news spread like wildfire. Toril's message of forgiveness had taken root, sparking debates and discussions across the lineages. Some resisted, clinging to their traditions, but others embraced the possibility of change. In a grand hall, Toril stood before a gathering of elders, their voice steady and clear. They spoke not of vengeance, but of unity, of building a future where honor was not defined by bloodshed. Their words carried the weight of conviction, and for the first time, the elders listened. Karen sat among the crowd, their expression unreadable. But when Toril finished, Karen rose and began to clap, a single deliberate motion that soon spread through the hall. It was not unanimous, but it was a start. Back on Marcus's colony. Marcus returned to his garden, his hands digging into the rich soil as he planted another row of vines. The work was soothing, grounding him in a way little else could. He paused only when the sound of footsteps reached his ears. Looking up, he saw Toril standing at the edge of the garden, a younger Vantari by their side. The fledgling's wide eyes sparkled with curiosity, mirroring the way Toril had looked on their first day here. "Thought you might like some company," Toril said, their tone light. Marcus smiled, brushing dirt from his hands. "Always room for more." As the sun set, casting the garden in hues of gold and crimson, Marcus and Toril worked side by side, planting the seeds of something far greater than either of them could have imagined. The seeds of change, the seeds of hope,